I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off-road. The guy managed the group. He was like, what are you doing in this beautiful car? I'm like, I'm going off-road. He's like, are you sure? Because you can use one of ours. And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability, as well as its robust interior, are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
Capella University is rethinking higher education. With its game-changing FlexPath learning format, you can earn your degree on your schedule and fit your education seamlessly into your life. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show. Today on the James Altucher Show.
What you're really saying is there should be not just freedom of speech, but freedom of information. There should be freedom of information even more than freedom of speech, particularly in a world that's now being governed by information.
Well, there's a cliche that we all used to believe that sunlight is the best disinfectant. This never even got questioned. This was the fundamental aspect of our culture, that we believed that full disclosure of everything would lead to truth. And that seems to have been very quickly revisited and rejected. We don't prefer sunlight at all.
Well, and it's interesting, too, because if you look generation to generation to generation, okay, when we were growing up, no one had peanut allergies. A generation later, because we've disinfected everything.
Absolutely.
You know, some huge percentage of kids have peanut allergies. And now, this generation, it seems, people are hurt if they hear words, or if Louis C.K. says something on your stage and it was unexpected. In the middle of a comedy club where nothing should be unexpected, people are somehow damaged in the way someone with a peanut allergy was a generation ago. And where does that lead? It doesn't seem like that trend ever reverses. First we were disinfecting our food, now we're disinfecting language. What's next? It's going to be actions and movements and no access to our data and what data the different organizations have about us. I mean, it doesn't seem like a trend that reverses.
I agree with you completely.
So excited to have my friend Noam Dworman on the show, owner of the Comedy Cellar.
Hey, James.
Your parents gave you 2 difficult names to pronounce.
Oh, I know. It's horrible.
So it's Noam Dworman.
Yeah, and you know, I always curse my father for that because his name was Menachem, but people called him Manny. So he should have been aware of what he was saddling me with. But you know, this was right after the within memory of 1948 in Israel and just being established, and he's very Zionist. He wanted to give me a real Israeli name, and it's a big burden ever since. Anyway.
So I just want to mention one time I was on your podcast, and you know, Comedy Cellar is the iconic comedy club. Basically, everybody knows about it if they've watched the TV show Louis, because Louis is always walking down the stairs at the end of the opening credits. And then more infamously or famously, Louis C.K. showed up and did a set a couple weeks ago at an 11 p.m. show on a Sunday night. We'll talk about that in a bit. But one time I was on your podcast and we were talking, and I mentioned, in full disclosure, I'm an owner of Stand Up New York, another comedy club, and you were funny. You said, okay, cut the audio right now.
That was a joke, right?
Yeah, you're making a joke to shut the podcast off. But
I was mad at Steven about that.
Why? What? Okay.
Because
Rebecca Trent was on with us. She owns the Creek and the Cave.
But I knew that. No, listen. When you're an employer, you understand this. If you, as an employee, the second you start keeping secrets from your boss that you know he'd want to know, you've lost your way in some way. Steven's a producer of my show, and he was actually a friend of mine, close friend of mine. He found out that you were now a competitor, as it were, and he did your bidding and didn't tell me. And he still works for me. It wasn't like a defining moment in our thing, but I said, "Whoa, that's not good," and I hope he won't do that again. I wouldn't have cared.
Yeah, that's the thing
to talk about.
Yeah. Maybe he didn't think of it was that important because it's.
No. He intended. He said to me, "I told James I wouldn't tell anybody." That's what he said. I told you.
Oh, okay.
I said, "Well, no, you can't. You have to tell James I can't keep that kind of secret from Noam because he's paying me." That's what I told him. You have to say that to people.
Yeah, and I did call him the next day, and I think I apologized at putting him in an awkward position, but
right.
I didn't think it was an awkward position, but it was.
Yeah, so, it was.
So I apologize to you about that.
No, you didn't do anything wrong.
But here we are. Comedy Cellar obviously is a much bigger place, and it's not only the Comedy Cellar; it's the Village Underground, it's the Fat Black Pussycat. You have Comedy Cellar in Las Vegas. Are there any rooms I'm missing?
No, you're not missing it.
And then there's the restaurant.
Above, it was kind of we regard the Olive Tree, which is the restaurant, and the Comedy Cellar as the same place.
Right. And then I'm always impressed. I think what you've done so well, and we could kind of talk about the background, and then we'll also talk about Louis C.K. a little bit. But from my view, what you've done so well is treated the comedians great. So the Comedy Cellar, typical in New York City is there's a lineup. A bunch of comedians go on, they get 15 or so minutes each, and that's their time. But if somebody wants to work on their hour for a special, whatever, they talk to you. From what I've heard, that you give them time in the Fat Black Pussycat. They work on their hour there. And it seems like you've created a nice home for comedians that's attracted to the best comedians to your club. And additionally, of course, you have great foot traffic in the Village. It's different kind of foot traffic here on the Upper West Side. It's more family foot traffic here. So it's just a different type of audience. But would you agree with that assessment? I mean, I think you guys treat comedians really well.
Yeah, we try to. And, that my grandmother was known to be just a wonderful hostess. Parties in her home. And this was one of her really defining attributes, and that was passed down to my father, and I think it's like and in some way passed down to me, just understanding the value of treating people in your home in a certain way. And small business people, for the most part, they do think of their businesses as their home. So these guys are here, and they sort of work for me, but they're not, they come and go as they please. And I want them to feel, I want to treat them the way I'd want to treat them in my home. And if you think of it that way, it's not that hard to do. But it comes from my grandmother.
And so what's the history? Go give us a little background on the history. I know your dad, Manny, started or ran, or he was originally a music club, right? The Comedy Cellar. Yeah.
So my father, he opened his first coffee shop in 1960, I think, in 7th Avenue South. And that became a place where local musicians would come in informally after gigs and sit around, mostly acoustic in those days, and play. And Bob Dylan used to come in, Jose Feliciano, Peter, Paul, and Mary. A lot of people my father knew in those days. And then at some point, because he was Israeli, a lot of Middle Eastern musicians started coming. And that kind of became the thing. And then he got a partner, and they moved on to McDougal Street, not where it is now, where Panchitos is. And he opened a full-blown nightclub with Middle Eastern music, and he was the leader of the band. And it was a huge success, like a big, big success. And then he had a big falling out with his partner, who still owns Panchitos, and then he moved down the street to this little place where the Comedy Cellar is now. And you can still see it on YouTube, the band, and my father in the band, and Esty, our booker, her husband was the accordion player in the band. So it's a very, mom and pop type thing there. And so it was a music club for many years. And then that became so successful in the Cafe Wah. Cafe Wah had closed in 68, but then like 73 or so, it became available again. My father moved to where the Cafe Wah was, leaving a vacuum where the Comedy Cellar is now. And he tried this and tried that and tried this and tried that. And then a guy named Bill Grunfest, who later went on to be head writer Mad About You, came in and said, hey, Manny, I can bring comedians here. You take the door, you take the drinks, I'll take the door. And that's how it started. So, and then Bill left after a number of years and my father continued to run.
So this was in the 80s. Like, what were some of the comedians you got back in the 80s?
Gilbert Gottfried, Jon Stewart, Bill Maher, shortly, I guess Ray Romano was pretty early in that. Basically all of them, except I think Larry David came in a few times. I don't think Seinfeld ever worked there. I don't think Seinfeld ever
And when you were a kid then, I want to get to your music in a second because you were at first really into being a musician, but as a kid hanging out there, were there any comedians that you saw and said, oh my gosh, this guy is going to be a huge success? Did you have an eye for talent then?
Yeah, well, everybody knew. Like, everybody knew Jon Stewart was going to be a success. Now there were people.
What stood out about when you saw him? He was a young guy.
He was handsome. He was, that's not the leading quality. He was killing. He had his own voice. He didn't require like the 5 years that comedians think they need to he hit the ground running. And it was similar to what I saw years later when I first saw Michael Che. And you just see it and like, oh, this is special. This is going someplace. This can't be, this is not a fluke. Same thing with Chappelle, some of these guys. Now, there was a guy who's still working, Alan Havey. I don't know if he's worked here.
I don't think so.
He was actually he was the strongest act in those days. He was the guy everybody wanted to be. Jon Stewart would look at him and say, do you think I'll ever be as good as Alan Havey? And he was leading man, handsome, and he got a movie deal, and he had the first, he just came out a little bit too soon, kind of like in that Malcolm Gladwell thing about, having to be at the right time. So he had the first talk show on the Comedy Channel or Ha before they merged. And he didn't become the huge star that everybody was sure he would be. And that's the one guy who stands out. But other than that, I think most people became stars. It was pretty obvious. Like, nobody was shocked for the most of them.
So your dad's still running the music thing, but he's also got the Comedy Cellar. Where are you fitting into all of this at that point?
Well, I graduated college in 84, then I went to law school until 87. And then when I was studying from the bar, I'd already decided I didn't want to be a lawyer.
It's like every comedian's an ex-lawyer.
A lot of them. Geraldo, like one of my best friends went to law school with Geraldo also. So we kind of knew each other through that. So funny how the Comedy Cellar became a vacuum. So the cafe, where the cafe was now, was kind of becoming a vacuum. So to kill time, I started a band. It was still like the last vestiges of a Middle Eastern band there, but nobody was paying attention to it. So I started a band Wednesday, Thursday, and Sunday.
Playing at your dad's place?
Yeah, playing at the Cafe Finjan. Mm-hmm. And it became a huge success. Like within 6 months, we had lines to come in. Mm-hmm. So that just became my career. And then we dropped the Middle Eastern music. I retook the name Cafe Wah, which had been a famous name in the 60s. People think it's always been there, but it hasn't. And then that's what I did until I was going deaf in 2009 or something. Earlier, 2006, I sold it. So that's what I did. And I was aware of the Comedy Cellar, but I wasn't involved, Like I would come to some of the meetings, whatever it is, but I wasn't really involved. I was just playing guitar.
You play a lot of musicians, right? Like what musicians? Well, I mean, a lot of instruments. What instruments do you play?
Play guitar, mandolin, bass, piano, oud. Oud, like a Turkish instrument. That's from my father played that kind of stuff. I think that's it.
And just out of curiosity, why are you going deaf?
For all that loud music at 5 nights a week,
And like, can you? I mean, if we didn't have, the mics are obviously not magnifying us, but can you hear me fine, or
I can hear you fine because you're speaking, assertively. Uh-huh. But like when my daughter speaks, sometimes quietly, depending on the acoustics, I'm like, what? I don't wear a hearing aid, but I will soon enough. Need to.
Does your daughter and your wife ever kind of talk really low so that they're like trying to get messages to each other without you hearing?
No, they haven't done that level of disrespect to their father yet. But
and so what happened then? So you sold the place. You slowed down the music. When does the Comedy Cellar enter the picture for you?
So my father died in 2003, right at the end. So he left the place to me and his wife at the time, Ava. So I was involved in the Wah and the Fat Black Pussycat and the Village Ground and the Comedy Cellar.
He had started all the other
No,
rooms?
those I had started independently. The Fat Black Pussycat and the Village Underground were totally independent. So I had all that on my plate, and then I had only 2 years left on my lease in the Wah, or 3 years left on my lease in the Wah, and the landlord was being coy about renewing it, as landlords can be, and I felt I had to throw in with one or the other. And since we own the building where the Comedy Cellar is, I decided to sell the Wah. I couldn't handle everything, so I decided to sell the Wah and just become full time with comedy. And I eventually bought my father's wife out, Ava, and I run it independently now.
And at the beginning, you already had some experience running a club. What was the difference between running a comedy place as opposed to a music place?
Oh, comedy's way, way easier. Way easier. The comedians are on time for the most part, and they're really, really happy to be there. Like, really happy to be there. Where musicians, they joke, like, what's the best way to piss off a musician? Give them a gig. Like, they're just disgruntled a lot of the time. And then we had a band. My band was working 4 or 5 nights a week, which, they get burnt out. And I was in charge of all the music and the arrangements, and it was a big, big job.
At the Comedy Cellar, are you there every night? Like you said, your grandma was a great hostess, and that passed down. Do you feel like the host of the impresario of the place? Like, I don't think you're there every night, right?
No, I'm not. I'm there usually at least 4 nights a week. Usually, now I have young kids, and my father was working all the time when I was growing up. He's a very good father, but that aspect of not being there as much for the kids is part of my experience growing up that I don't want. That I'm really making sure that my kids are not suffering that. So I draw the line and I just stay home.
When you're there, it seems like you're not as much watching the comedy as you're just sort of hanging out at the table or in the other tables, and you're just there.
Yeah, I mean, I watch the comedy.
What's the hardest part of running the club?
Well, right now, I have like the greatest general manager ever, Liz. I don't know if you've met her or not.
Yeah.
You've heard her. So it's never been easier because she's just that good. But previous times, everything is hard, making sure that the food comes out right, that the lights are right, that the licenses are taken care of, that the floor is clean, that they scrape the gum off the floor, you name it. I mean, every aspect of repairing the air conditioners, making sure the sound system, it's crazy.
Do you get down into those details?
Yes.
Okay, so that's...
Rego is here somewhere. He'll tell you that I don't feel that I know every aspect of every system in the place. I designed the online reservation system and did some of the coding. I designed the sound system. I know about all that stuff. I had to learn to do them myself, so I did.
And was it the fact, I always think of the Comedy Cellar as like, has always been big, but was it the fact that, did the Louis show take it to a new level just because it was featured every single episode?
Yeah, it started, I think we got on the escalator, as it were, when Seinfeld was shooting his documentary Comedian, which has kind of become like an important documentary in the comedy world. And then Tough Crowd came. And then Louis came, and then there were, so each thing kept adding to it, and then social media came, and that really gave people and podcasting really gave people a much more perfect understanding of what was going on. If you remember in the old days, you'd have to read like some tourist guide that was obviously paid for, and you would hear the description, and you go, and it would stink, and whatever it was. But now people are really quite informed about what the best places are, where the important comedians performing. When a star dropped in, the world hears about it. So that was really an accelerant, I think, to business.
I remember there was one day I was actually scheduled to go on your podcast, but it was the day after you had the $1 billion lineup. Like everybody dropped in. Who dropped in that night?
Oh, was it?
It was just a few months ago.
Chappelle, more. It's like a year ago. Chappelle, Seinfeld, Amy, Schumer, Chris Rock, Dave Attell.
Did they all plan it? Like, did they all call each other up and say, "Hey, what are you wearing?"
No, and Louis wasn't there. I don't think. No, it was all, I think if I'm not mistaken, Amy Schumer and Jerry Seinfeld had done a show together, like a talk show. I could be getting this wrong. So they came down together, and everyone else just came in by coincidence.
And so even now, like who, I'm sure you delight in seeing comedians rise up from the Comedy Cellar to stardom. Who's kind of impressing you there now? Who's been amazing? Who do you see as like, this is going to be a star?
Oh, I can't go on record about that stuff because the omissions will get me in trouble because people are very sensitive. But without making predictions of a star, I will tell you this. I think that Joe Mackey is one of the most original voices out there in comedy and very, very smart, almost on a Louis C.K. level insight into things. And I'm really rooting for him. I'm not predicting it, but I'm really, really rooting for him. And his crew of Sam Morril and Phil Hanley and Chris Stefan, all these guys are all really, really, really funny.
So you brought his name up, Louis C.K. just now. We'll segue into the third rail. Louis C.K., of course, has been absent for quite a few months because ever since he was accused of all these different things. He wrote a sort of apology about it, and then he disappeared.
And he admitted many of the things.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he disappeared, and then a few weeks ago, he shows up at an 11 p.m. Sunday night show and does, 5 minutes of material?
15
minutes of material, and the world erupts.
Yeah.
Like, every question possible. Like, A, should he have done this? B, was his material apologetic enough, or what did he say? C, should the Comedy Cellar have allowed this? D, should he ever come back? Why should he ever come back? And you and I even texted the next day after that. All these questions came up. Maybe the questions are appropriate or inappropriate, but what did you think when you heard after the fact, right, that he had been there? You get the call maybe that night or the next morning?
I got a text message that night, but I didn't see it till the next morning.
So like Louis C.K.'s here. Were you surprised?
Yeah, I was surprised. I had thought that he was going to go. I thought a year was going to be kind of the buffer. I thought he was going to wait a year.
And then what did you think? So we'll get to his original absence from comedy in a second, but what did you think was if you were to give him advice, what would you say to him would be the right way? But before he came up on your stage, what would you have said to him would have been the right way to come back and get accepted again into comedy society?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's, like, thinking of it kind of like an election analogy, there's some people on either side, who are just never going to be convinced. Like, there's some people who still were supporting Nixon even, but there is the great middle of people who can be persuaded one way or another. And I think they were the people who were going to watch how he did this and would be affected one way or another, whether they then wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. So now having said that, I think that he's kind of checked out. I don't know this personally, but it just seems to me that when this all happened and he was kind of humiliated, he probably just threw his phone and his computer in the drawer and really doesn't realize what the atmosphere is like. So that could be the reason that he didn't do this.
And probably that's not a bad thing for someone to do, just for their mental health.
I did it during this whole thing I had. I couldn't even imagine how he could have put up with this, because I was being hated, but I wasn't humiliated and I wasn't embarrassed for my daughters. I mean, you can just imagine the incentives to just put your head in the sand and not have to deal with it. But I think that if he had come on stage and said, "Listen, I've been gone for a while, but I've really taken stock of myself and I've learned, and I'm going to be different, and I appreciate your kindness in allowing me to win your trust back," or whatever it is, I think that a lot of people would have felt like they were piling on at that point if they were still calling this guy a monster. Like, what more do you want from him? Some people wouldn't be satisfied.
So if someone starts off a comedy set saying that, it's almost like too serious. Like, are people going to laugh after that? It's a little harder for him to get back control of the comedic aspect.
I don't agree. I think he could have. And a guy like him, man, he could have found a way to end it with a joke or something like that.
Yeah.
But even still, he had bigger fish to fry that night, and it would have been worth it. Even if his set didn't go, even if it detracted from his set in some way, which I don't think it would have. Maybe for a minute or two, but people would forget about it. It would have been the headline. It would have been much better.
Right. And so when after he sort of disappeared from things, he had been, I imagine, a friend of yours, if not a good friend. Like you were interweaving in business just because the Louis show had so much to do with the Comedy Cellar and vice versa.
Yeah, so here's the thing. We're not friends at all. Not at all.
Did he just call you up and say, hey, can I do the Louis show opening credits at the Comedy Cellar?
He didn't even ask me if he could do that. Like, I didn't know he was doing that till the show was on the air.
Huh.
He asked me, could he shoot at the club? And I said, sure. And I made that happen. I cleared the deck to let it happen for him. But at that time, I had seen basically every project of every comedian fail.
Right.
So it's not like we said, oh, this Louis show is going to change the world of comedy. It's like, I mean, he had just had a previous one on HBO that flopped.
Yeah, Lucky
and
Louie.
He had Pootie Tang, and this guy was not hitting him out of the park. And
his specials were sort of hitting them out of the park.
at that point, I don't even know. Maybe
What
you're
was
right.
hilarious or...
You're
know.
more into it than I am. I do remember that there was an HBO show, it was like a tribute to Seinfeld, I think. And there was like Gary Shandling, Robert Klein, I think, and then Louis C.K. was the third person on the panel. And I remember thinking to myself, isn't that nice that Louis is being regarded in that inner circle of the best comedians? That was the first inkling I got that Louis was somebody that people that was on the rise. But nevertheless, I didn't see the show at the time as any big opportunity. And he did it. He never told me about it. And it wasn't an act of friendship. He's definitely fond of the club, and he's fond of my father and all that. But in the end, and this is as it should be, he did what was best he thought was best for his show. This was the vibe he was trying to capture in his show.
Particularly like the atmosphere of the table. So just to describe the table, it's all the best comedians essentially in the city sort of gather every night at this table, and you have to be one of them to hang out at the table. There's fun conversations, and I think he was trying to capture a little bit of that in a lot of the episodes.
Yeah, he was, and in the opening sequence, like this kind of like getting a pizza, kind of like a non-glamorous life, and walking down to this dinky little club in the basement. Sets up the atmosphere for the show, for Act One, right? So that's why he did that. It wasn't out of allegiance to me, and I was very appreciative to him. I did at some point come to him and thank him, and I stopped. At first, we were charging like a small location fee, which is normal, and I said I didn't feel it was appropriate to get any fee any longer because it was actually really benefiting the club in a way which made it just piggish, I thought, to take any money. And then we had one interaction after that where we had one conversation about like raising kids, but we didn't, that's it. Like the guy, he's to himself and his close friends. And I don't want to talk too much, but I think also that's part of why I'm able to run the club well, is because I understand it's my ball, so I get to play, but that's not a strong dynamic to come into a situation with. So when I see famous people or whatever it is, I really don't try to cozy up to them or have a relationship with them or pretend we're pals or whatever it is. I'm more like, do you need anything to eat? Do you need anything to drink? Are they taking care of you? And I leave them alone. And if something happens on its own, a conversation, I'll have it.
So, but after all this news broke about him, did you call him up and say, hey, what's going on? Or
no, I didn't even have his number until later. I did have one conversation with him towards the end of all this stuff that I didn't want to share, but it was nothing really. And I don't have any insight into his thinking. I don't know anything.
Did he suggest that he might be coming back soon, or if he did come back, he'd be doing it at the Cellar, or?
No.
So it was just sort of like a hello, how you doing? Hope you're okay.
Yeah, it was. I don't want to say it was, but it was very much not on the subject people think we would talk about. I didn't deem to question him or anything. This is his business,
Yeah, and
be presumptuous of me.
And I sort of feel like, who knows really everything that happened between this set of comedians and that comedian. Like you said, he admitted to a lot of the story, so we know that when he admits, it's not a he said, she said, he admits. But then there's kind of further allegations that, if not him, maybe people involved with him prevented certain comedians from breaking out or having their own shows or whatever. Who knows? It seems like that's a different type of ethical violation, but I don't think he's ever addressed. No one's ever addressed those. So those are just sort of hanging in the air.
So now you're touching, you're dragging me into, not intentionally, into what is the most unpleasant aspect about all this, is that merely to discuss what you just put on the table is put my head on the guillotine and be interpreted as somehow, blaming the victims or not trying, you name it, like just being a total friggin' monster. But, so I want to try to give that disclaimer,
right,
and say that I don't know anything about that, and I haven't read anything factual about that. I did try to contact Dave Becky actually at one time to try to learn about that. He didn't get back to me. I don't blame him. And the only thing I would say is that, for instance, when Gawker printed the stuff about Louis, they got a lot of the story right. But there was one part of the story where they said he blocked the door and wouldn't let them leave. Then when the Times investigated it, they found actually, no, he didn't block the door. Only to say that the rumor can certainly be wrong or exaggerated or whatever it is, or it could be understating it. We don't know. But I've seen interviews with jurors at times, and you just kind of saw that when they were the ones, they knew they had to make these decisions, all of a sudden they take things very, very seriously. And I think that's kind of the difference. Like the public says, well, he did this, and these people never worked again, whatever it is, and it could all be true. But in my position, I say, wait a second, I need to know that things are true. I just can't smell it in the atmosphere and say, well, that's shit, So I have to verify it. And
why did you have to know? Just because?
Well, if people expect me to take action on something, they shouldn't fault me for wanting to make sure that I have the right to investigate it. That's the thing. And these are the lessons of, since the Magna Carta or the Bill of Rights, of due process and fairness and giving people benefit of the doubt and perjury. And we got away from the idea of town square justice and public humiliation and like the struggle sessions that China used to do where they just curse at people,
But at the same time, this obviously just doesn't happen in the comedy arena. There's sort of this trial by Twitter and trial by social media happening in almost every area of life now. So
it's terrible.
And it's hard to say there's obviously no right or wrong. It's kind of in a per situation basis. Like obviously Harvey Weinstein is being labeled a monster for many good reasons. A lot of women have come out and said all these things and have various proofs. Bill Cosby, also being labeled a monster for many probably equally valid reasons. But on the same time, you have just immediate trial by Twitter, and everybody just believes what the mob is saying.
I think the trial by Twitter is almost by definition wrong. And we do have, so it's hard to say, maybe I didn't make it clear, but we do have quite developed institutions to make sure that people make amends for the things that they do, whether it's a civil court or a criminal court, or even, sophisticated labor procedures. And up until recently, we all respected that and took pride in the fact that we didn't do things by emotion, we did things by procedures. And it seems like now we think that was all like a big dumb experiment. Really, the way we should be able to do it is just read it online or read a paragraph in the Times, and then anybody who's in a position to punish ought to dole it out. And I think this is just not. Nobody, I think, really believes that that's the way the world should be. I don't think they really want that.
And I think though there's this gray area where like take someone like Louis C.K.
Okay, and the thing with them Louis interfering with people's work. Somebody should take him to court for that. That is not something that you can't get redress in a court for. If you interfere with somebody's ability to contract, tortious interference, I don't remember, but there's definitely a legal doctrine for that. And then you go before the court and they take evidence and they punish. And that's as it should be. And if somebody should be punished, I hope they are punished. But you can't just put it out in the atmosphere and expect somebody 15 years later to say, I heard that you might have done this, so you're out of here.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So, I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game-like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy. The future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list, because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Gary Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. boost your confidence, and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get 2 memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply. It's interesting because obviously there are criminal situations where someone could either go to jail or pay a
Like
big
Weinstein or Cosby.
Right. Then there's civil situations where someone could be sued and then owed money, and it's not quite the evidence. The standards aren't the same for criminal allegations.
Easier to prove.
Right. And then now we're getting this gradations though into mob justice, where someone like an Aziz Ansari, regardless of what you think of the situation, like, I've heard women describe it as either a bad date or another instance of, patriarchy gone wild. But that's where there starts to be a gray area. What is the quote unquote punishment? Is his career over? Does he come back? Is this meaningless? So we start to get into these gray areas. And Louis C.K., while not as gray, he did, he is maybe arguably one of the greatest comedians of our time. And he did come out with his statement admitting these truths, which many people did not do. He didn't appear to do anything illegal. No one's taking him to court for anything.
It might have been illegal. It might be indecent exposure or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if it's in a private place. I don't know if it's indecent exposure.
The Times, if you can read between the lines, the Times reported it as sexual misconduct. So that to me felt like their lawyers had felt that there was nothing there which they could say Louis C.K. accused of criminal anything.
Right, and we're not defending it. We're just trying to define.
Yeah, could I just stipulate that I've been accused of not believing the victims. Nothing can be further from the truth. And as a matter of fact, they tweeted out recently a much more detailed version of this story, which really I was taken aback by. Because, for instance, in the Times article, it just talks about worrying that Dave, Becky, or that there might be repercussions to them. But they tweeted out recently that he told them that he would bury them. I'm like, well, that's really serious, and it rings true when they say it. I just get put in this impossible position. And I just can't say it enough that it's not about not believing anybody. It's not. I take everybody at their word. I don't know how else to put it, but it's an impossible position to be in.
So your first reaction when you heard that Louis C.K. was on the night before, did you think he should have waited a little bit longer? What was your immediate first reaction? Were you like, oh shit?
No, my immediate reaction when I saw the text messages was positive. Like my gut reaction was, oh good, this is probably going to be a good thing. And then I checked in on the audio of the performance, and then when I heard what had gone on, I said to myself, oh, this is not going to be good.
Why? What did you hear?
Because he didn't address it, and because some of the things he touched on were, I knew would be. By the way, if you heard it, it wasn't bad. It really wasn't. It wasn't like a defiant joke about rape or something like that. He was talking about whistles and plays on words, and his clean as a whistle and his rape whistles, and blah blah blah. But I knew that the word was going to get him in trouble. And then
why don't you think? And Louis C.K. is a pretty aware guy of words. Why do you think he wasn't aware that word would get him? Or you think he was testing the crowd? Or why do you think he wasn't aware that word would get him in trouble?
I think it goes back to what I said before. I think that he just maybe unplugged and really didn't realize how much residual anger there is about not just him, but the whole Me Too movement, and how, and how bad Twitter is, and how people are buckling to Twitter with James Gunn and all kinds of things. I don't know. But and then we got a really bad complaint shortly after that from a customer who'd been there the night before, like a guy who was screaming at me on the phone, whatever it is. And then I knew we'd stepped in.
So a guy called, you didn't know him. He wanted to, he had been at the thing.
Yeah.
And what did he say? He said, what did he say?
Said I was there with my in-laws, and we come to the Comedy Cellar to have a good time, and this was upsetting them, and how could you do this to us? And I let him speak, and then I gave my side, and since then we actually became friends, and he actually, I don't want to mischaracterize what he said, but he came in and he offered to tell people, the media, that he thought he'd kind of overreacted. So I think once he heard my arguments and he read the Hollywood Reporter interview and stuff like that, he said, you know what, all right. But he still, if only he had said something in the front, then my mother-in-law, would have been placated, kind of. She was more conservative in some way, and it would have been okay. So,
and then there was also women who complained afterwards that they since it wasn't pre-announced, they felt like they were suddenly in this uncomfortable situation where they were dealing with their own maybe tragic situations from the past, and now they were confronted with someone who had been conflated as part of this whole Me Too movement.
Yeah, well, they didn't contact me, and then we contact all our customers and get feedback, and I hope this isn't wrong. I hope they didn't actually contact me and I didn't see it or something. I was answering every bit of mail, but I only learned about them reading about it. So I never had the chance to interact with them, I don't think.
So and I've heard you say this, that you wouldn't do anything differently, but given everything that's happened, let's say you were there that night, would you have kind of pulled Louis C.K. aside and said, hey, just say something up front?
No.
Or would you have done anything differently if you were there?
If he had spoken to me about it, then I would have offered that opinion. But I would have not presumed to have gone up to him and told him that, unilaterally or, gratuitously. No, I wouldn't have. But I would have trusted him to know how to handle it too.
Right.
It wouldn't even occurred to me that he wouldn't do that.
Right. So that was maybe the most surprise to you, was that he didn't do anything to address it. But the argument a little bit is, I forgot.
But can I just say, but that's his, like, from his point of view, he wrote that apology, I use it in quote statement, and you or I may think that it was inadequate in certain ways, but he may think, well, I've already copped to this, and I've already said what I want to say about it, and I don't want to say it again. And you and I could say, well, Louis, I think it's wiser for you to say it again. And he says, no, I don't want to. I've said everything I want to say about it. And that's between him and his audience. That's not my place as the club owner to tell him how to handle not only his career, but the things, that are so personal to him and what he's done wrong and how to handle it. It's just not my business.
And, obviously this event of Louis C.K. performing at your club is almost more, the meaning of it is almost more symbolic than what actually happened. Because clearly comedians go on stage and say horrible things, and some comedians are horrible people. Some things we know about, some things we don't. Some things people whisper about, but everybody gets the platform on a comedy stage if they're a professional comedian and they're not in jail. So I think all the criticism of, oh, you shouldn't let him on, you have to ask, and I think you have asked the question, if you start doing that, where do you draw the line? Is there an actual line? Because, obviously free speech is allowed. Obviously comedians have earned their place to be on whatever stage they're on. When does there become a free line where you do start to doubt whether someone should be on stage or not, assuming they have the skill to be there? Well,
of course, it would be easiest to make the decision if it was just plainly bad for business. If everybody just gets up and walks out when somebody goes on stage, then it's like, well, obviously I can't put you on. I'm here for my customers. But this is dicier because the customers are interested to see him. Even the customers who hate him, I don't think that's the same thing as saying they're not interested to see him. And
because everybody, it's like watching a reality show. Everybody wants to see a train wreck also.
Yeah.
So people go to if people just want to laugh, I always think there's plenty of YouTube videos that are funny that have nothing to do with stand-up comedy. I think a little bit of going to a stand-up club is there's something's going to happen. There's an experience of it as well.
Yeah, without a net, So then the question is, when am I supposed to make decisions? Now, I always have the right to exercise my personal morality. There's not a free speech issue in that sense, but I understand that everything I do is a precedent, and then very quickly I'm going to have to account. Well, why did you do it with this guy, and not with this guy? Like, well, if you didn't let Louis on, so why are you letting Aziz on? And then I have to start distinguishing between Aziz and Louis, and they're like, oh, really? So you think that Aziz's victim doesn't? You just get into this bottomless pit. And I've experienced some of these things in the back and forth I've had with customers who emailed me about this stuff. They're basically just as mad about Aziz. And to try to distinguish them in their mind is showing that I just don't get it and I'm a monster. So I try to err on the side of just letting it be. And now it would be easier for me, like things like anything to do with anti-Semitism or Jewish like that, well, I can just let them on and no one's going to question me on it because nobody thinks I'm not sensitive to the Jewish people or something. And I wouldn't care. Like if somebody said, I just don't care. I was like, that's not my, I don't know, it just doesn't, for whatever reason, I don't care. But then you have more difficult situations where somebody says something about another ethnic group, and then if you want to take this, you can't really take the same attitude because it's going to be interpreted as you don't care about the racism towards that group. So I can see scenarios where I would have to compromise, but I would like the ethic in the world to be more the way it used to be, which is that we were prepared to just see people we didn't like. And like when I went to college, like this racist Mayor Kahana spoke at the university and nobody cared, and, I don't think it's wrong that the head of Iran who calls for Israel to go up in a ball of flames speaks at Columbia. I just think it's all fine. I think it's much better than the alternative, which is, Twitter mob filtering the world.
And do you think we're heading in a direction where the Twitter mob, it can't stop? We can't pull it back?
Well, I think one of these big companies needs to stand up to this.
But they're not. They're going further in the direction.
They have
stepping
to.
on the
They
pedal.
have to, because they're going to stand up to it, and then the emperor will be seen to have no clothes. And just to be clear, it doesn't mean that the things that people on Twitter are upset about aren't worthy to be upset about. But that doesn't mean that they can impose their will. I mean, everybody's afraid to say things. In this whole Louis thing, I literally called up a bunch of liberal intellectuals that I know, people who write for prominent newspapers. I spoke to a labor lawyer. I spoke to an ACLU attorney. Like, I really was trying to seek out people who would tell me where I was wrong. And nobody that I would speak to would want me to tell anybody publicly that I spoke to them. Everybody is scared. Everybody's scared.
Well, look at what happened the very next day. Michael Ian Black, a comedian, he's also an actor, he's been on the Jim Gaffigan show. He comes out and says, hey, the guy, he's only going on a stage in front of 100 people. Give him a chance to whatever. He was trending on Twitter for 2 days. There was like 1 million tweets against him. And the guy's the most alt-left guy out there. People didn't seem to realize.
They don't care.
And then now Norm Macdonald is being crucified. I don't even know what he said, to be honest, but he's being crucified for something relating to Louis C.K. and Roseanne.
He said, what he said was bad. If you read the words, it was bad, but, we all say things that come out wrong. But what he seemed to say was that what Louis suffered, it could be interpreted to say what Louis suffered was worse than what the victim suffered. That's one interpretation of what he said, which is not on the face of it ridiculous, or just fundamentally, maybe not worse, but so fundamentally different that they should both be given equal sympathy. But I made this, I think I said to you before, that not that long ago when Michael Richards did something really bad, went on stage and started calling people the N-word, he did go on Letterman a couple nights later. And at that time, nobody criticized the Letterman show for putting him on. That didn't mean that they weren't outraged by at all. Nobody was sympathetic to Michael Richards and what he said. Everybody thought it was terrible.
So what do you think's changed in the environment?
I think it's the social media and Twitter.
So it's now it's not only what you say, there's this guilt by association of if you even talk to somebody who the Twitter mob is against, or even talk about them, you're potentially on the third rail as well.
Yeah, and I guess and this goes to this book, Coddling the American Mind, I guess it also is tied in with the younger generation's view of trigger warnings and safe spaces and this whole, the speech codes on campus and policing hate speech. there's this more and more expectation that, as I put it, that the people at the bottleneck of distribution, people who control this, are responsible to filter the world from us before it ever gets to us. We should even never see it. Ideally, we should never know about it. Like, ideally, I guess, Twitter should have, and they certainly would have the technology to do this, they should have been able to stop Roseanne's tweet before it even actually came out.
But okay, but then when do you start, when, and this is neither being left or right on politics, both sides kind of are guilty of this without realizing it, but why doesn't both sides realize this could all lead to some sort of Orwellian police state? Because that's what's happening. When you start legislating the words people are allowed to say and the people you're allowed to talk to, the only trend is towards fascism.
Absolutely. It's happening. And I would think that Roseanne tweeted that thing, that it was terrible, but we learned something from that. And if they had stopped it before she tweeted it, we would not have learned that. So this is...
What do you mean we learned something from what she said?
We learned something about Roseanne. Like, we know a side of her now, whatever explanation is, but, so the idea of Twitter, if Twitter's bot or, their algorithm had been able to identify an ethnic joke about black people and stopped it right then, I'm not clear, like, is that what people want? Because then you actually leave her to be as whatever you think, and then you're still watching her show. You don't know what it is. So they haven't thought through any of this. This is just emotion given a new power.
But you know what? It's actually really interesting because what you're really sort of saying at a deeper level is who has the right to the data. Because all we're saying, all these words on Twitter, and then you have to know Roseanne's race, you have to know where she comes from, you have to know who she's talking to. This is all just data. And so then to have algorithms to say who can say what and who can do what and what advertisements are shown, this is use of data, and the use is done by the people who own the data. So right now, Facebook, Twitter, Google own an enormous amount of data, and they're not giving it to us freely. The mob is sort of taking what we do get freely and doing something with it. But what you're really saying is there should be not just freedom of speech, but freedom of information. What Roseanne said, whether or not it's appropriate, gave us information about her, and we do need to have that information. So there should be freedom of information even more than freedom of speech, particularly in a world that's now being governed by information.
Well, there's a cliche that we all used to believe that sunlight is the best disinfectant. This was like the never even got questioned. Like, this was the fundamental aspect of our culture, that we believed that full disclosure of everything would lead to truth. Like, and that seems to have been very quickly revisited and rejected. We don't prefer sunlight at all.
Well, and it's interesting too, because if you look generation to generation to generation, okay, when we were growing up, no one had peanut allergies. A generation later, because we've disinfected everything, some huge percentage of kids have peanut allergies. And now this generation, it seems people are hurt if they hear words, or if Louis C.K. says something on your stage and it was unexpected in the middle of a comedy club where nothing should be unexpected. People are somehow damaged in the way someone with a peanut allergy was a generation ago. And where does that lead? It doesn't seem like that trend ever reverses. We're now, first we were disinfecting our food, now we're disinfecting language. What's next? It's going to be actions and, movements and, no access to our data and what data the different organizations have about us. I mean, it doesn't seem like a trend that reverses.
I agree with you completely, and these were the kind of huge thoughts that were going through my mind as I was contemplating what's going to happen when Louis comes back. And at one point, I'm like, who do I think I am? Like, thinking that my little thing here, even to think that I'm involved in such a huge worldwide influence of issues. But I did think that it would matter, and it turns out it really did. It is a little. What's the word for it? Whatever. It's like it represents this whole issue, all tied up in one, in this whole Louis thing. Every single aspect of what you're talking about came to play here.
Right, because you have to decide even more than freedom of speech, which is freedom of information. since he was so much in the news as part of symbolic of what was going on in the Me Too movement, we have the right to see what he's going to do as a world famous comedian. We have a right to see what he's going to do when he speaks in front of 100 people for the first time.
Yeah, well, I say, do I really believe that freedom, that the default position should always be towards freedom of speech? Do I really believe the lessons of due process, of procedures, of benefits out of investigations? Do I really believe that the Twitter mob shouldn't have any say? Like, all these things are all at play here. And, I think it's terrible that NBC didn't put Norm Macdonald on. It's like the earth would not have crumbled if they had.
Right, and it's so different, as you say, from the Michael Richards case where he was on David, as wrong as he was on David Letterman 3 days later with Jerry Seinfeld sitting right next to him.
Yeah, they don't have to, and they need to stop thinking that you're advocating for him or you're sympathetic to him just because you have him on. I mean, Steve Bannon goes on 60 Minutes. People understand the journalist probably doesn't like Steve Bannon. I don't know where it's leading. I think it's not. People are not giving it sufficient thought, and I've noticed in all this thing that when I try to talk to people about it, they really just start calling me names. It's been very upsetting. Like, you just can't you can't have a conversation with people about it.
And I think you shouldn't. I think my advice to you now is just to ignore as much as possible and let the free markets decide. But I'll ask you one final question. As a brand new beginning comedy club owner, what's one piece of advice you'd give me?
Location.
Unfortunately, we're in the Upper West Side.
No, you hit on it. That is going to be your headwind always. I think you're probably, if we switch places, you might be exactly the same situation I'm in. I don't know you that well, but I'm pretty sure you're smart and doing most of the things right.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Well, Noam Dworman, I love the Comedy Cellar. I love going down there. You have great comedians there. Anybody could show up on any given night, as we know. And thanks so much for coming on the show. Will you have me back on your podcast?
Absolutely. I love when you come on the show.
Excellent. Thanks, Noam.
Thanks, James.
AI might be the most important new computer technology ever. It's storming every industry, and literally billions of dollars are being invested. So buckle up. The problem is that AI needs a lot of speed and processing power, so how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and of course, nobody does data better than Oracle. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. If you want to do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/advance. That's oracle.com/advance. oracle.com/advance.